Am I the a-hole for choosing to go on a trip with my girlfriend instead of taking care of my struggling brother's son? For context, I, 24M, have a brother Luke, 31M, his wife Emma, 28F, and their son, Kyle, 4M. They moved to my city last year because Emma got a new job. At the time, it actually felt like a good thing. We weren't extremely close growing up because of the age gap, but we didn't have any issues either. Having them nearby felt like a chance to build a better relationship as adults. Not long after they moved, they started asking me occasionally if I could watch Kyle. I work from home and my schedule is pretty flexible, so from their perspective, I was the obvious option. I didn't hesitate much in the beginning. I've never really liked kids, and that hasn't changed, but I figured helping out family every now and then wasn't a big deal. Back then, it really was occasional. Once or twice, every couple of weeks at most. Usually for a few hours while they handled something or went out. Kyle was also a very easy kid to deal with at that time. He wasn't loud, didn't make a mess, and mostly kept himself occupied. I could put on something for him, give him a few toys, and continue working without too much disruption. Because of that, I didn't see it as a burden. It was manageable, and I didn't feel like it was interfering with my life in any serious way. Over time, though, things started shifting. Near the end of last year, Luke decided to change careers. Before that, he had been working remotely, which meant he was home a lot and could handle childcare more easily. After the switch, his new job required him to go into work much more often, and from what I understand, he was also making significantly less money. That change seemed to affect everything. They started relying on me more frequently to take care of Kyle. At first, it was gradual. It went from once every couple of weeks to once a week, then twice, and eventually it became a regular part of my routine without there ever being a direct conversation about it. Before I realized it, I was watching Kyle around 3 days out of the week. That's when it started to feel different. It wasn't just occasional help anymore. It felt like an expectation. There were times when they would tell me instead of asking, or they would phrase it in a way that assumed I was available. Because I work from home, it seemed like they viewed my time as something that could be adjusted around their needs. The problem is that just because I'm at home doesn't mean I'm free. I still have deadlines, meetings, and work that requires focus. Having a child in the apartment, especially one that needs attention, changes that completely. At the same time, Kyle's behavior changed. I don't know if it was because he was getting older, reacting to changes at home, or just becoming more active in general, but he became much harder to manage. He wasn't the quiet, easy kid I had been watching before. He started running around constantly, making noise, grabbing things he shouldn't, and interrupting me while I was working. It got to a point where I couldn't concentrate properly. I would try to set him up with something to do, but it didn't last long. He needed constant attention, and I wasn't able to give that while also doing my job. I started feeling frustrated during those days, not just because of the noise or interruptions, but because it felt like I was being put in a role I never agreed to take on long-term. There were also smaller things that added up over time. Cleaning up after him, making sure nothing got broken, adjusting my schedule around when he would be dropped off or picked up. None of it was extreme on its own, but combined with the frequency, it became draining. One of the moments that stood out to me happened when Emma came over to pick him up. She was looking around my place and made comments about some of the furniture. Things like tables with glass edges or anything she thought could be unsafe for a child. At first, it sounded like casual observation, but then it turned into suggestions about changing things to make the apartment more child-friendly. It didn't feel like a passing comment anymore. It felt like she was expecting me to adjust my living space to better accommodate their son. She also made a remark about baby-proofing the place because they were planning to have another child. It was said casually, but it stuck with me. I didn't respond in the moment, but it bothered me more than I expected. It made it feel like my apartment wasn't really being seen as my space anymore, but as an extension of their needs. Around the same time, I started noticing how much my own plans were being affected. I used to travel regularly with my girlfriend. It's something we both enjoy, and we make time for it when we can. We had a routine of going somewhere at least once a month. That stopped for a while because of how often I was watching Kyle. It wasn't something I had explicitly agreed to give up, but it became difficult to plan anything when I was constantly being asked to be available. I had promised my girlfriend that we would go somewhere special for Valentine's, especially since we hadn't been able to travel the past couple of months. We planned a 1.5-week trip starting on the 15th. It was something we had both been looking forward to. When I mentioned it to Luke and Emma, I didn't expect it to become a problem. The reaction I got caught me off guard. Instead of just acknowledging it, they immediately started questioning who would take care of Kyle during that time. It wasn't framed as concern or something they needed to figure out themselves. It was directed at me, like I had created an issue by making plans. They brought up how often I've been helping them and implied that I should be prioritizing that over trips. The way they described it made it sound like my plans were irresponsible or unnecessary. At some point, it turned into comments about needing to take more responsibility because I'm an uncle now. That part didn't sit well with me. Up until then, I had been helping because I chose to, not because I saw it as an obligation. Hearing it framed as something I owed them changed how I saw everything that had been happening. That's when I snapped. I said that their child isn't my responsibility and that I'm not going to give up my life for decisions they made. The way I said it wasn't calm or measured. It came out harsh and more aggressive than it needed to be. The argument escalated quickly after that. It wasn't just about the trip anymore. It turned into everything that had been building up over time. There were a lot of things said that probably shouldn't have been said, on all sides. They left, and since then, we haven't been on speaking terms. What I didn't expect was how quickly it spread beyond just the three of us. My parents got involved, as well as Emma's parents. From their perspective, I'm in the wrong. They see it as me refusing to help family when I'm in a position to do so. The way they've been reacting has been intense. Messages about responsibility, about what it means to be part of a family, about how I should be willing to sacrifice more to support them. It's been constant, and it's been overwhelming. My parents in particular have been very clear that they believe this is something I should be doing, not something optional. They've framed it as a duty, which is not how I ever saw it. That's been the hardest part to deal with. It's one thing to have an argument with my brother and his wife, but having the rest of the family involved and taking their side has made it feel much bigger. It's not just a disagreement anymore. It feels like I'm being judged for how I live my life and what I choose to prioritize. Since all of that happened, it's been weighing on me a lot. I haven't been able to just brush it off. Seeing those messages, reading how they view the situation, it's affected me more than I expected. There have been days where it's just stayed in my head and made it hard to focus on anything else. It's not just anger or frustration. There's also guilt mixed in, even though I still feel like I had valid reasons for reacting the way I did. I keep going back and forth on it. On one hand, I don't think it's fair to expect me to take on that level of responsibility, especially when it started as something occasional and turned into something much bigger without any real agreement. On the other hand, it's my family, and the way they're reacting makes me question if I'm being too rigid or selfish. I'm starting to wonder if I really should be taking more responsibility. Am I the a-hole for choosing my trips over my brother and nephew? Update. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. I spent a good amount of time reading through everything, and even though I didn't respond to most of it, it did help me look at the situation differently. A lot of people pointed out things that I hadn't fully connected before, especially when it comes to my family dynamic. After sitting with it for a while, I started to see a pattern that I had kind of ignored for years. My brother has always been treated differently. Growing up, he was the one who got more attention, more support, and more understanding from our parents. At the time, I didn't question it much because it was just how things were. Looking back now, it explains a lot about why I've always felt like I had to earn my place or prove myself more. It also explains why I moved away as soon as I had the chance. I didn't consciously frame it as escaping that dynamic, but that's essentially what it was. After thinking things through, I decided to meet with my brother and my SIL in person. I didn't want things to stay in that tense, unresolved state, and I also knew that the way I handled the argument wasn't great. I went into the conversation with the intention of owning my part without backing down on the actual issue. I apologized for the way I spoke during the argument. Calling their child a demon and making the comment about them having him was unnecessary and out of line. Regardless of how frustrated I was, that wasn't the right way to express it. They accepted that apology, but that was where it ended on their side. There wasn't any acknowledgement of how things had escalated or how their expectations had affected me. During that conversation, something came up that I wasn't expecting. It turns out that both my parents and my SAL's parents had been actively encouraging them to rely on me for help. It wasn't just them making those decisions on their own. They had been told, repeatedly, that I should be helping and that it was reasonable to expect that from me. That explained why the situation escalated the way it did. From their perspective, they weren't overstepping. They were acting within what they had been told was acceptable. It also made it clear why my parents reacted so strongly when I pushed back. They had been part of building that expectation from the beginning. I told them clearly how the past few months had been for me. I explained how the situation went from occasional help to something that was affecting my work, my time, and my personal life. I made it clear that I felt taken for granted and that the way things were handled made it seem like my time didn't have value. I also told them that I was done watching Kyle. Not reducing it, not setting new limits, but stopping completely. I said they needed to figure out another arrangement going forward. That didn't go over well. The reaction was immediate, and the conversation shifted again into an argument. It felt like everything I had said about how the situation affected me didn't really land. The only part that seemed to matter to them was that I wasn't going to continue helping. At some point during that, Maisel brought up something that caught me off guard. She said that if I wasn't willing to watch Kyle anymore, then the least I could do was help pay for his daycare and contribute to some of their other expenses. The reasoning behind it was that I have enough money to travel regularly, so I should be able to redirect some of that toward helping them. That was the moment where I stopped seeing the conversation as something that could be resolved. Up until then, even with the arguments, I thought there might be a middle ground somewhere. Hearing that made it clear that the expectation wasn't just about help anymore. It was about entitlement to my time or my money, depending on what I was willing to give. What stood out to me wasn't just the suggestion itself, but how it was said. It wasn't framed as a request or something to consider. It came across as something I owed them, which didn't sit right with me at all. I didn't respond to that directly. At that point, I knew that continuing the conversation wasn't going to lead anywhere productive. I felt like I was getting close to losing my temper again, and I didn't want a repeat of the previous argument. So I left. I didn't make a scene or try to get the last word in. I just got up and walked out. It felt like the only way to avoid escalating things further. Not long after I left, my phone started going off. Calls, messages, notifications from both my brother and my parents. I didn't check any of them at the time. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and left it like that for the rest of the day. When I eventually went through the messages later, it was more of the same. Disappointment, frustration, and a lot of emphasis on what I should be doing differently. There wasn't anything in there that suggested they had understood what I was trying to explain. At that point, I had to make a decision about how to move forward. A lot of people had suggested going no contact, which is something I hadn't seriously considered before. It felt extreme, and I didn't want things to get to that point. But after everything that had happened, it was hard to ignore that nothing was changing. The pattern was consistent. My boundaries weren't being respected, and when I tried to enforce them, the response was pressure, guilt, or escalation. So I decided to step back completely. I'm not speaking to my family right now. That includes my parents, my brother, and my SIL. It's not something I did impulsively. It came after seeing how the conversation went and realizing that continuing to engage wasn't leading to anything productive. I'm not saying it's permanent, but for now, I don't see another option. There needs to be some level of acknowledgement from their side before anything can move forward, and that hasn't happened. It's been a strange adjustment. On one hand, there's less immediate stress because I'm not dealing with constant messages or expectations. On the other hand, it's still my family, and creating that distance isn't something that feels completely normal or easy. At the same time, it's also made things clearer. The situation wasn't just about babysitting or one argument. It was about a pattern of expectations that built up over time and the way those expectations were reinforced by the people around me. For now, I'm focusing on my own routine again. Work has been easier to manage without the interruptions, and I've been able to follow through with the plans I had put on hold before. I don't know how things will turn out long term, but at this point, I'm not willing to go back to how things were. I'll be keeping my distance unless they're willing to actually acknowledge what happened and have a real conversation about it. Thanks again to everyone who took the time to comment.